Okay, good morning, students. Happy Wednesday. This is April 15th, 2020. This is our second session of rhetorical analysis review and preparation for your rhetorical analysis essay over 1984. So let's start by reviewing what we did yesterday. Your major assessment over this book will be writing a rhetorical analysis essay over one of the two passages that you will select. So there are two prompts down here. You're picking one. All right. And you read these yesterday, so we don't need to necessarily read them again, but they're there for you on the video. You can pause them. You can pause it if you'd like to read those two prompts. All right, and again, with those two prompts, we talked about how to really go in and read that prompt carefully for rhetorical situation elements. And for a review of that, I posted this. This is the SOAPS acronym. Helps us to understand what we mean by rhetorical situation. We look at the subject, the occasion, the audience, the purpose, and the speaker. Now, all of these go together, but occasion, exigence, and context, they're slightly different, and we'll talk about the slight differences between those, but I went ahead and lumped those all together for the purposes of keeping the acronym and keeping things simple. All right, but we'll talk about slight differences between what occasion is versus exigence and context. They're not that much different, but again, we'll talk about those differences. But you see here let's just look at this prompt really quickly and to show you what I mean. Where it says in 1997, that's more just simply context, like when is this taking place? But then it goes down. The United States Secretary of State Madeleine Albright gave the commencement speech. Okay, so that's more of an occasion. That's the specific occurrence that demanded this particular text. All right, and in general, with occasion, we're talking about like what is it going on within the larger context that urged the writer to want to write this, that made this a like I must write this kind of situation. And when I'm using those charged words like must write this or demanding me to respond, those types of words are what we mean by exigence. Like exigence means like urgency, like something happens and you feel compelled, a need to respond. That's exigence. And occasion is basically the same thing there. Like what she has to give this commencement address. She's accepted the challenge. All right, so again, just slight differences between context and occasion, but I just kept them together again for the purposes of simplifying the rhetorical situation. And then graduating class of Mount Holyoke College is their audience, and her purpose, if you see down below, is to convey her message about the importance of perseverance. And we also talked about, purposes can be twofold or multifold. There can be a couple of different purposes for a particular passage. All right, and your job as a careful, close reader is to pick those things up. A lot of times in the prompt, the creator of the prompt will establish what the main purpose of the passage is, and your job is to illustrate how the speech itself or the text itself, whatever it is, achieves that purpose or is meant to achieve that purpose. And we learned some information about who the speaker is in this, Madeleine Albright, United States Secretary of State. And, that's basic information. But throughout the actual passage, when you're doing your careful reading, you will learn more about who she is based on what she says. And the same goes for audience. Like, why did she choose to deliver particular information in the way that she did? Well, that has mostly to do with who she's speaking with. And in your own situation in life, we've talked about this in class before, when you're trying to do something, when you're trying to persuade somebody of something, or to get you to, or to get them to to think the way you do, or to get them to allow you to do something, you're going to address them in certain ways based on who they are. All right, and so audience is a key component of this. So let's move forward. All right, attacking the prompt. I gave you some tips. Attacking the passage. I gave you some tips for annotating a passage, keeping the rhetorical situation elements in mind as you annotate. And here are some of those, annotating tips. Underline key ideas and paraphrase them in the margins. I tell my students this, you guys, this all the time, and definitely I do this with my students I tutor as well. It's, when you're reading a passage, and particularly a complex one, it's important to pause every, 10 or so lines, maybe more, maybe less, to review with your, sort of keep an ongoing review with yourself of what it is you're reading. So like, let's say after the 10th line, you just, in the margin, you just give a quick one sentence or less summary of what's happening. Underline key ideas, or I'm sorry, key lines, those key lines that stand out to you. Study those key lines. All right, and by that I mean, before you start writing the essay at all, just take some time to reflect on what those lines mean in the moment, what they mean to you right now. Write down some notes, and I'll show you some examples of what I mean a little bit later in this lesson. Look for the rhetorical situation. What are you learning about the audience and the speaker? Most importantly, what are you learning about the audience and the speaker here? When you're doing a rhetorical analysis essay, you'll find yourself, speaking mostly about like what the person is saying and what that's revealing about that person, and how that text is meant to persuade or affect the direct audience, speaker and audience. You'll be talking mostly about those things, and so I think those are the most important things to notice. As you're annotating the passage and you're starting to, come to an understanding of what the author is doing, start to chunk the passage. Identify shifts in tone, topics, or meaning. And when you're doing that, and we'll talk further about this going into today's lesson, when you're able to chunk the passage, what you're really doing is showing yourself your outline. Like if you can say, here's the first third of the passage, not necessarily in terms of like direct first third, like number of lines of the first third, number of lines for the second third, and so on, like not equal thirds, but rather first third in terms of like the first part of the passage, and then there's a shift, and then there's maybe possibly a third shift or even a fourth shift. You want to be able to find where the author is shifting from point to point, because again, that will set you up to write your analysis essay in chronological order. All right. Your homework for yesterday. Your homework was to annotate the prompt for rhetorical situation elements and to annotate the passage for key ideas, lines, and rhetorical situation elements. You could also have taken an extra step and chunked the passage, broken it up according to where you saw those key shifts in tone, ideas, or purpose. And at the end of today's lesson, you will revisit those annotations and see where you can add to them, change them, etc., based on what you learn. So the overview of today. Although we went over how to attack the prompt by looking at the Albright prompt from an old AP exam, we did not apply the annotation strategies by delving into the actual speech she gave. We didn't do that. You did that on your own with the prompt and passage that you selected for your essay. But today, we will focus on attacking a prompt and passage from earlier in the book. Lesson goal, you'll be able to see how purposeful note-taking, not only for the passage, but also of the prompt itself, can set you up to write an insightful, engaging rhetorical analysis. That's always the goal. By that, I mean always the goal is to be insightful and to be engaging. So, guided practice. First, let's review a scene from earlier in the book. Semi's speech to Winston on destruction of language being a beautiful thing. Hopefully you remember this passage. We spent some time on it in class. I know it's been a while. As you can see from this slide, it was February 25th when we did that. And it was part 1, chapter 5. All right, it says before you reread this passage, though, let's look at a rhetorical analysis prompt for it. Let's just say, this is not your essay prompt, but let's just say it is for purposes of this lesson. And we're going to look at it. I've revised this prompt to use the stable wording of an AP rhetorical analysis prompt. All right, so take a minute to just read the prompt. Okay. So, guided practice with this. As you'll recall, we are looking at the rhetorical situation through this acronym called SOAPS: subject, occasion, audience, purpose, and speaker. So, can you annotate the prompt for these elements? Take a second, once again, to look at the prompt and see where these elements of the rhetorical situation are revealed just within the prompt itself. Take a minute to do that. Pause the video. I'm going to speed this along, so I should mention just pause the video for a second to annotate the prompt. All right. So if you have annotated the prompt, it should look like this. Well, yours might be a little bit different, but they're probably very similar to each other. And I'm going to spend a minute here to talk about some occasion, exigence, context. They're not all exactly the same thing. There's slight differences. I just lumped them together like this in order to keep the rhetorical situation simplified in terms of SOAPs. But in chapter 5, okay, so that is actually context. Like, where is this taking place in the book? That's what context is. Occasion is the situation within that context that urged the writer to write, that required the writer to write. All right, so what was demanding Sem, or Semi, however you want to pronounce it, what was demanding him to deliver this speech? Like, what compelled him to feel like, I have to say this? What's he responding to? All of that is occasion and exigence, like urgency of the moment. All right, to deliver a speech, or to write a letter, or to even just send a text to somebody. There's a set of circumstances that urge you to want to respond, and in fact feel compelled to respond. And that's what we mean by occasion and exigence. So we'll get into that when we dive back into this particular speech from Sem. Audience, purpose, speaker. So in chapter 5, Winston's friend Sem, a philologist who works in the research department of the Ministry of Truth and who is working on the 11th edition of the Newspeak Dictionary. So there's a lot about the speaker right there in that explanation. Argues that it's a beautiful thing, the destruction of words. That's his message, okay? That's his subject. Then it says, read the following carefully, then write an essay in which you analyze the rhetorical choices Sem makes to persuade, so there's our purpose, Winston, audience, that the destruction of language is a beautiful thing. All right, so that's what his purpose is. All right, now, that's just the basic overview of the rhetorical situation found within the prompt. And we talked yesterday about, like, you can use that information as a lens for reading the passage. All right, because rhetorical analysis is about, identifying certain elements of the rhetorical situation and what makes the passage effective through those elements. Like, what makes it effective? Why is it that the speaker chose this particular way to deliver this message to this particular audience? All right, those are questions that you're answering, and obviously you can hear within that the elements of rhetorical situation: speaker, audience, message, purpose, etc. Okay, so attacking the passage now. Now, what I want you to do is read and annotate the passage according to the following. All right, so down below you see these bullet points. I'm going to have you pause the video before going on to the next slide. I want you to take about 7 minutes to read and annotate the passage. All right, so you'll need your book. So if you don't have your book out already, you'll need to go get it. And it says open the book to page 50 to find the passage. And there are the first few words of the passage and the last word of the passage from page 50 to 53. But it says, for your convenience, I've copied and pasted that passage into a Google Doc, and it's right here. So if your book is like at the other end of the house right now and you just don't have the energy to get up and go get it, I have saved you. Right here is the prompt, and as you can see, there's the passage, and I've even gone in and put the page numbers of that passage, 50 to 51 to 53. All right, so I'm going to close this off. Come back to the slideshow. Um, so again, underline key ideas and paraphrase in the margins. Underline the key lines. Study those key lines. Like, think about what those key lines mean for the whole passage. Look for rhetorical situation elements again. Most important thing to notice, and chunk the passage to identify shifts in tone, topic, or meaning. Now, again, before you go on to the next slide, hit pause on the video. Take 7 or more minutes to read and annotate the passage according to these things. Okay, what I'm going to do now is, now that you've read and annotated the passage, I'm just going to go through how I did this and how I did each of those bullet pointed items. I basically saw, I skipped a slide. I saw this. I'm going to start with chunking. Actually, you can go in any order you want to with the bullet points. I'm just going to start by showing you how I broke it down. I decided that there were 3 sections of this, but you could easily have broken it down only into 2 sections, and perhaps I'll explain how you could have done that. But basically, I saw 3 parts of this that I would have chunked it into. Semi explaining what he means by the destruction of language being a beautiful thing. I saw that as the first third of the passage. Secondly, Semi explaining the ultimate purpose of the destruction of language. He's going from what it means to now here's the purpose of that, like why we're doing it, why we're destroying language. And third, the last part of the passage, I saw him really showing, teasing out the implications of the destruction of language. And by implications, I mean, if this is true, what follows from this? If, like, what Semi is explaining as the meaning and the purpose of the destruction of language, then what could follow from this? All right, so I broke it down in 3 ways. And so let me just go in more depth on how I broke that down. So, guided practice, underlining key lines and studying those key lines. Again, that's part of the bullet points I gave you for annotating a passage. Okay, so first, Semi explaining what he means. And then this is a comment that I made about like studying the key lines. Because beauty is such a subjective term, I derived from the reading that Semi is equating beauty with simplicity. And there's a bunch of different ways you can define beauty. So, what do you mean by that? What does Semi mean by beauty? It's not necessarily like, a beautiful flower or a beautiful human being. He's talking about the destruction of language and simplicity that is left. So, in this first section of the passage, he makes many claims supporting his belief that simplicity is beauty. And I'm not going to read all these quotes to you. You're certainly able to hit pause and look at them. But these are some of the lines that I underlined that I thought were important from him explaining what he means by destruction of language and how it's beauty through simplicity. Then, next part of it, Semi explaining the ultimate purpose of the destruction of language. Again, this is the second third of the passage that I saw a shift. And again, I want to emphasize we're not necessarily looking at equal thirds, but rather just shifts where we see, breaking or chunking where we see shifts. So in this section, here's another, again, me studying the line, providing a comment. In this section, Semi goes beyond his fascination with the sheer beauty of destroying language to enlighten Winston on what Big Brother is really up to by destroying language. It's not just, hey, let's make language easier and everything's going to be great. There's a underlying purpose behind that, and I think that it speaks back to that party slogan of ignorance is strength. If the people only have a few words at their disposal, it's almost like we're reducing language from this complex and vast assortment of words that we can use down to just like bare minimum. It's almost like we're returning to the cave. We're cave dwellers, just uttering one or two syllable words at a time and shortening sentences down to nothing. And if that's true, the implication is that people probably aren't going to be able to think really well because, when you're thinking, you're giving a voice to your thinking through language. And so in this section, we're Big Brother's really doing here is trying to reduce people's ability to think. If they can't think, then they don't perhaps know that they're oppressed and they're easier to manage. So this is kind of what Big Brother's really up to, and I think again it points back to that ignorance is strength. Ignorance of the people is strength for the party. And then here are some quotations that go along with that. I underlined the type of repetition there. Newspeak is Ingsoc and Ingsoc is Newspeak. And I made a little point here. The reverse repetition employed in the underlined line above, it's also known as antimetaboly. Rhetorical technique. We don't have to know the name of the device. If you can just notice it as a kind of repetition, and you'll be good. You're good with that. But it says solidifies the true aims of the party with its intentions to control thought, or to, I would say, reduce the ability to think, and make its citizens unthinking sycophants, which is a word for like a follower. All right, last part. Or next part, Semi showing the implications, and again, implications if this is true, if what he's saying about his meaning and purpose are truth, and what follows from this. And we've started to talk about implications through like ignorance is strength. Like this is what follows from reducing language is people not able to think and therefore not able to rebel, and they're easier to control. But here's again me studying the lines. One of the three-party slogans, ignorance is strength, shines through in this passage. The destruction of language, while it may be simplifying how we speak to one another, also encourages the destruction of our ability to think for ourselves. That's a big point in this book. While ignorance of citizens might be strength for the party, for someone who craves individuality and craves a time when thought is free, remember that quote from earlier in the book, this message ought to be a huge red flag for Winston. Here are some key lines from Semi that reveal the purpose and implications of destroying language. All right, and so once again, I'm not going to read those to you. You can read them for yourself. But to me, those are really showing implications. All right, so now it's looking for the rhetorical situation. You remember that's another one of the bullet points that I gave you for annotating a passage. Again, I'm not going to read all of that to you. You're welcome to read it. But you can clearly see I'm going beyond just one or two words here or there to indicate this subject. We're now that we've read the passage and we are diving deep into it, we can say more things about each of those. And I'll mention to you in a later lesson about how to put together your paper, especially about how to put together your introduction. You can see as you read through this that there's a lot of good information that you could use to compose an introduction based on the rhetorical situation, based on your own notes. And further in the body paragraphs, you can draw on this information to set up your main idea sentence, your assertion, your evidence, and your explanations. All right, so let's review. Again, today's lesson is focused on giving you confidence to annotate a text and to start to see the essay developing in your head. I think that's one of the main goals of reading a passage carefully and taking really good focused notes, is that when you're done with them, you can hopefully see how your paper's going to go. You can see it flowing in your head. And so here are those annotation steps again that we went through. Underline key ideas and paraphrase them in the margins. Underline key lines. Study those lines, provide some comments on them. Look for the rhetorical situation, and chunk the passage. Now, again, we haven't even written the paper yet, but we haven't put together your introduction or body paragraphs or talked about how to do that yet. That's coming. But before you can do any of that, you have to really take some good notes. I want a thorough, well-developed paper, and I want you to go in depth. I don't want a basic paper that anyone could write that doesn't really a cursory understanding. I want more. I want something in depth, and this is how you will. And I think you want that as well. You want to give your paper a real reason to be written, a real goal. All right, and that goal, hopefully, part of that goal is in depth, engaging, purposeful analysis. All right, so looking ahead, how do we take the notes that we just wrote, the careful notes, and start to put together a paper? So tomorrow, on Thursday, we'll pick up where we left off and start to discuss, how to take our detailed annotations and compose an essay using the SEM passage as a model. Before tomorrow, revisit your annotations over the essay prompt you selected, remember that you came in with today, and try to add to them, making use of some of the items you learned today, particularly with rhetorical situation, that little chart that I made. Perhaps you can, if you didn't do that yet, you can fill that in and add to it whichever passage again you've chosen, and hopefully you can. And then also chunking the passage if you didn't do that yet. Perhaps you can go back and really look for where you see shifts in that passage so that you can set yourself up to write a good paper. All right, and that is it for today. I hope you've enjoyed this lesson. I hope you've gotten all the way to the end of the video, and have a pleasant day.